Good afternoon, Dr. Billings. Thank you very much for appearing on our show on African Voices platform. First of all, let's start by your reaction with the news this morning that South Yorkshire will be moving into the very high tier of COVID-19 alert.
Well, we're not surprised, of course, because we could see the way infection rates were going. First of all, we were worried about Sheffield, then Rotherham, then Barnsley, then Doncaster. So all of our districts in turn have produced some alarming figures. I know they've started to come down a little bit in Sheffield, if I recall where we're at currently, but we're clearly not in a good place in South Yorkshire. So I'm not surprised we've been put into the highest tier.
So what adjustment should people expect in the next coming days?
Well, I think they need to listen very carefully to what is said, because I don't know, even at this moment, exactly what all the details might be in South Yorkshire, because each district that goes into tier 3 seems to have also some particular issues around the restrictions that are very local to them. So people need to look at the newspapers or watch television to get or go on the government website for that matter, in order to know exactly where they are in South Yorkshire. But we're clearly at the highest tier, so that it's very restrictive in terms of our local businesses, in terms of where you can travel, who you can meet, or under what circumstances. And people need to understand that and get acquainted with that.
So as a police and crime commissioner of the region, so what would this mean in terms of policing?
Well, I don't think from a policing perspective, they also need to understand now what the restrictions are going to be. And they're going through Parliament. So we need for that process to happen, first of all, so that the police are very clear about what the law actually says, what these regulations under law are, as opposed to any other off-the-cuff guidance that a minister, for example, may give. So we need to pin that one down, and that's going on now. The legal department of South Yorkshire Police are getting the details of that, and they'll see exactly what the law is. But it does mean that if people don't obey those rules, then they will be approached by the police, and the police will tell them, explain carefully what the rules are, what the restrictions are, and ask them to conform to them. And they'll do that in a measured and a proportionate and hopefully a pleasant way. If people insist on being willful and disregarding that, then clearly the police have powers then to enforce the law. But hopefully, under lockdown, when we had the lockdown in March, people in South Yorkshire were very responsive and did as they were asked to do. So I'm hopeful that that will continue.
Speaking of that, though, what learnings had the police had looking at the previous lockdown that you think could be implemented in these new restrictions?
Well, my feeling is that if what the government are asking us to do makes sense overall, if we feel the government have got a strategic plan to get us through the crisis and hopefully to get us out of it at the end of it, if what they then ask us to do in different localities makes sense, it fits in with that overall strategic plan, we'll all understand that and we'll obey the rules. And what we found during the period of the lockdown was that 99% of people in South Yorkshire did do that. They followed the rules. Sometimes it took a while for them to understand exactly what the rules were, but as long as people understood them, they were willing to follow them. Because at the end of the day, this is a health crisis. It's a public health crisis. It's not a crisis in policing or in the law. It's to get our health on a decent footing here in South Yorkshire. And within the infection rates going up as they are, they've got to get a handle on that and get them down.
That's very interesting, isn't it, to recognize that some of the laws or the restrictions have been kind of very complicated to understand. Having said that, what will you say like to residents who are kind of like concerns, how long will these restrictions last for? Or can you share an idea, how long will it last for?
Well, it's not for me to say those things really, because I'm the Police and Crime Commissioner, so I'm not public health, I'm not a local authority, and I'm certainly not the government. I think it's for the government to have clear messages to all of us about this is our understanding of how we're going to get control of this virus, how we're going to get the infection rate down, and how ultimately we'll defeat it and come through. In a sense, all we're doing all the time is buying time to get to the point where there's a vaccine available for the whole of the population. So we need some sense from the government about how they see that journey and what that plan is. And then our local restrictions will make sense in the context of that. But we've got to feel that what we're being asked to do here, these tier 3 restrictions, fit into that bigger plan. And it's for the government to say what that bigger plan is.
Yes, I understand you are not from the government, nor someone from public health, but also a public figure here in Sheffield or in South Yorkshire, being a crime commissioner, you are directly elected. So let's say Sheffield or South Yorkshire region was kind of like granted £41 million from my understanding for these new restrictions. And we've seen what Greater Manchester, what the issue has been there in terms of the local authorities trying to negotiate a better deal, i.e. wanting 65, but the government offered 60. Do you have any idea how did the government come into that conclusion to offer South Yorkshire just £41 million?
Well, my guess, I don't, but my guess is that what has happened in the negotiations with regard to Manchester, and before that with Lancashire, is that they've kind of stumbled into a formula as far as the money goes. And the formula is that they're going to work it out per head of population. So you're going to get something round about £26-7 per head of population, something of that sort. Now, I don't think that was how they went into this, but I think that's where they've got themselves to now, the government. And therefore, I assume that the 41 million that you mentioned that's coming to South Yorkshire is worked out in that way. It's a calculation, therefore, per head of population. Again, my understanding is that money will be given to improve the test and trace systems in each locality. You've got to get that right. You've got to know what's happening to the disease in your part of the world, and you've got to have a proper, reliable testing and tracing system. If you don't have that, you don't know where you are. So that's got to come into place. And we know there are a lot of troubles with that. I know there's been a lot of boasting about it's the best system in the world, etc. Well, it clearly isn't. Only today I've had someone come to me and give me an example of how that has failed them. They actually had a test and a trace, and then were told, well, it didn't work, so you're going to have to do it again. We can't afford for that sort of thing. You've got to have a reliable test trace system so that people can isolate and we can get the infection rate down.
Just to be broad more on that subject that you've just mentioned here, talking about the £41 million, to be specific, £11 million is kind of for the test and tracing system that you are just talking about here. And the other £30 million is to support local businesses and employees. Do you think that is enough in order to help the people of South Yorkshire?
No, I don't, if I'm honest. I think probably Andy Burnham and those people in Manchester, their figures have probably got it right. If you're seriously going to help people, particularly at the lower paid end of the jobs market, if you're really going to help them, they worked it out and they reckon that, I think they started off at 90 million was about what they would need in the Manchester area. And I don't know whether they will settle or how that will work, but the government are clearly going to impose tier 3 and presumably all the finance that follows from it. The last time I heard, the government was saying 60 million was on the table in Manchester, but Andy Burnham had got to come and ask for it before they got it. Now, I'm assuming that in South Yorkshire, that's all agreed, so the money is coming. But I don't think it is enough at all. But they're clearly not going to make any more available. So that's bad. I'd be anxious and I'd be worried if I was someone in a lower paid job, or if I was trying to run a small business in the county, in the city, Sheffield, and the county generally, because I don't think it is enough.
Yeah, and there are hundreds of thousands of people in this region that are into these kind of lower paid jobs or into small businesses that, where the jobs or businesses are at risk. And we've seen also that COVID-19 has disproportionately affected Black and ethnic minority communities. And we know that most of the people as well that are into these lower paid jobs, or for example, taxi drivers or other lower paid jobs, are from Black and ethnic minority community groups. So what can you say here to people who are kind of like concerned about their jobs, about job security? What can they do in terms of mental health and well-being and that kind of thing?
Well, I think what you just outlined is almost the perfect storm when you get low-paid jobs, and we know that, as you say, the disease has affected disproportionately people from minority ethnic groups. Now, when you put all these things together, it's very serious what we have. So I can't give any false optimism. That would be quite wrong. All I can say is that people like myself, insofar as I can do what I do, I will do it as well as I can to make things as easy as possible for people. So there will be some people who are employed, for instance, in the voluntary sector and the community sector. Some of that I commission things from them. I can ensure that we have the money there for commissioning those jobs. If people appeal to me for funding around particular projects, don't have huge sums, but we can help that. But that's just a drop in the ocean when it comes to the broad mass of jobs across the region. And I'm afraid, sadly, I do think there is a north-south divide here, and it's clearly revealed at this time. I'm not at all convinced that if the things that are being asked of businesses up here were being asked of businesses in other parts of the country, down south, I think it would be a different story. So I think we are not in a good place, but there we are. That's the government is the government, and they've made their decisions. And my job as Police and Crime Commissioner is to ensure that the police, A, enforce the law. They've got to do that because that's their job. And in order to get the infection rate down, we've got to make sure those restrictions are obeyed. But as far as jobs go, then it's very limited what I can do. Funnily enough, the only jobs that are secure for the moment, of course, are those in policing in South Yorkshire, because we're recruiting at the moment, and we will go on recruiting for another 12 months or more. So I hope that people from all our communities, including and especially our ethnic minority group, will consider policing, because it is one of the few secure jobs at this time.
Speaking of that, though, do you think there is enough awareness on the recruitment of policing in South Yorkshire, and are BAME communities kind of like encouraged to join these posts? If they are, in your opinion, why do you think they are reluctant to join it?
Well, the police have been asked to broaden their recruitment to make sure that their BAME representation is increased as a result of this recruitment process. And they're doing their best to ensure that. But you do need people to apply for the jobs in the first place. So I would say to people who are in the BME community, particularly at the younger end, we don't want people to start their lives unemployed and nothing to do. It's a good career and it's very varied. Not everybody in the police force is in uniform on the streets. There are lots of jobs in police staff, all sorts of jobs, finance, HR, analytics, IT, all sorts of jobs in the police, which are available to people. I would say seriously consider that and think about that. We know historically there are all sorts of reasons why relationships between particular communities and the police are not good. But one way of getting them better is by people from those communities to join. And they would have my assurance that I will do what I can to make sure that they can not only join, but once they're in the organisation, that they are welcomed in it and feel included and in it and able to make a proper contribution.
And just before we wrap up, if I may come back again in terms of policing for these new restrictions that will be coming into force from Saturday. Just a couple of days ago, South Yorkshire Police said they will be enforcing new restrictions wherever possible, but they will be working along with local authorities. So, but they said there will be certain things the police will be doing, but there will be other issues where it will have to be dealt with by local authorities. So here, where is the balance? What has the police got to do? And where is the job of the police and the local authorities? How will you square balance, or how will you make the difference?
Well, there are some businesses, for example, which require the permission of the local authority to operate. They require, in some cases, licenses. Pubs are an obvious one of those. So they will have to be careful, because licenses that are given can also be taken away. So they will need to obey the law, and the local authority and others will be making sure that they do that. Otherwise, they will be in some difficulties. The job of the police is at the harder end, where you've got people, as I say, willfully, recklessly disobeying those regulations. The police will have to enforce, and they've said very clearly that they will enforce. They will be doing that in a measured way, proportionate way. They will first of all seeking to persuade people to obey the rules. But if they really willfully just won't do that, then there will have to be enforcement. So there will be fixed penalty notices, there will be fines, and people can be arrested if they are really difficult about this. So I'd say to people, the rules are there for a reason, and the reason is to do with health, the health of all of us. And you may be someone who's not affected by coronavirus, but your relatives may be, particularly your elder relatives or those with some underlying health condition. It's incumbent on all of us to make sure that those rules are obeyed.
That was Dr. Alan Billings, the South Yorkshire Police and Crime Commissioner, speaking to me about the new COVID-19 restrictions that will be coming into force in South Yorkshire from midnight on Saturday. Meanwhile, my colleague Chiwe Chihana also spoke to Abdul Galil Shaif, who is from the Bema community, who stressed that the government did not do enough to look after the people of South Yorkshire, in particularly the people from the Bema community.
Good evening, Abdul. Welcome to African Voices platform and Sheffield Live TV.
Good evening.
Thank you so much for joining us. Abdul, the Bema COVID-19 Action Group has released a statement following the announcement that Sheffield, South Yorkshire region is going to go into tier 3 lockdown restrictions. And there has been a statement. Could you talk me through that and why that position?
Well, the statement is designed to support people on lower income and businesses. And when I say people on lower income, I mean people in the hospitality sector, people working in the care industry, and people in their low-key roles within society who are going to suffer extremely hard because of the lack of economic stimulus into South Yorkshire. So we made this statement as a response, not just to the pandemic, but as a response to the needs of these people, these workers who keep us alive every day.
Absolutely. And what do you foresee happening? So is it the budget that's been allocated to Sheffield that you're complaining about, or is it the measures?
Well, we understand today, after we made the statement, that a deal may already be made between the mayor, the councils, and the government. I hope it hasn't been made. I hope that we can show the same guts and the same solidarity with our people, that the way Manchester has done and the way that Manchester Lord Mayor Andy Birmingham has done, because I think it's remarkable that he was able to put up a fight. This government needs to be challenged on these issues, which are of crucial importance to our lives now that we are not just in the middle of the pandemic, maybe at its heights. So we need to make sure that we protect the people that are protecting us. Unless we protect them, we'll be unsafe.
Part of that, I suppose, is the learnings that the Bema COVID-19 Action Group that you're chair of has done quite a lot of work in the last few months. And there have been lots of learnings, I suppose, that have been where you are today. Has there been better collaboration between the Bema community, not just the Bema COVID-19 Action Group, and the authorities such as the City Region and the local councils?
Well, just to correct you, I'm no longer chair now. The chair is Olivia and Sahira. We have two joint chairs, but I'm still in the Bema group, yes, and I'm still active in the Bema group. And I can tell you that there's a lot of collaboration between the different communities, not just to fight back, but to support. We're there to collaboratively work together to support our communities, and we're connecting as much and as far as we can with the local authority and the public health agencies and other voluntary organisations like VAS to try and make sure that we save the people of Sheffield. At the end of the day, it's not about black and white. It's about saving working class people, whatever they are. We live in those areas. We're connecting those. We've got to look after each other. Unless we look after each other, we cannot depend on this government to look after us. This government looks after its friends. You only have to look at the tracing, test and trace system to understand our contracts have been given to people that don't deserve those contracts. While we at the bottom in our communities are felt helpless in those terms. So we need to look after each other. This government is not going to look after us, but we also need to put huge pressure on our council and our Lord Mayor for South Yorkshire to actually put up a fight, show some guts, show some solidarity with the people that they're connected with. Sheffield needs help, and it's time for politicians to show the political will to actually fight back.
Well, that's it for this week's African Voices. To you, our viewers, thank you for watching. This show was presented by myself, Baile Jallo, and my colleague, Chiwe Chihana. Thank you very much and have a very good night.